I would like to invite the chair of this session, the Executive Secretary of SICOS, to come and take the floor. He will be leading us in the first part of this session. And after that, we'll inform you what will follow and who will be chairing. So, yes, SICOS, you come and take the floor and lead us through this first part of our session. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I think we rest very well. So this morning we will start with the keynote from Professor Lumumba. Professor Lumumba from DR Congo. No. As you know, our continent has the enormous potential of fresh water, in the world of fresh water resources. Despite that abundance water in the continent, these resources are underutilized. That we're still facing risk and pollution with increased climate challenge. Many numbers of states recognize that underutilized of resource and the lack of infrastructure is a key driver for achieving socio-economic development. So this morning, through the keynote of Professor Lumumba, we know exactly what we need to get in the socio-economic, the role of river basin organization that have to play to reach that socio-economic development. So I will invite the professor to take the floor. He will be introduced by Engineer Matemo. Professor.
Dear colleagues, good morning. I will continue to say good morning until you respond accordingly. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. At least now I feel comfortable. Yeah, allow me without much ado, because today we'll have like half day here, and later after lunch, we'll go and move a little bit, go to the Secretariat. You know that the Secretariat is not here. This is not the premise of the Secretariat, and you cannot come here all that way from the corners of the continent and you ended up here, go back to the airport. This will be really not acceptable according to our customs and traditions. Allow me to introduce our keynote speaker today. And Professor Lumumba, thank you very much for finding time out of your busy schedule, very tight, and you have given us honor really to take time this morning to talk with us. And who is Professor Lumumba? Professor Lumumba, PLO. Famously PLO Lumumba. In the TikTok, you can see YouTube and all this. Is the founder of the PLO Lumumba Foundation and a consultant with Lumumba and the Lumumba Advocates and a member of the Africa Justice Group. Professor Lumumba, whose full name is Patrick Lodge Otieno Lumumba, was born on 17th July 1962 and raised in Usenge and Nairobi, Kenya. He received his LLB and LLM degrees in the law at the University of Nairobi, followed by a Doctor of Law, LLD, in the law of the sea at the University of Ghent in Belgium. He holds honorary doctorate degrees from University of Cape Coast in Ghana and Bells University in Nigeria. He is an advocate of the High Courts of Kenya and Tanganyika and a certified mediator. He is a fellow of the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya, a fellow of the Kenya Institute of Management, and a honorary fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. And he is the chairman of Sarafina Investment Group in Monrovia, Liberia, and economic strategic growth and government initiative of Africa based in Nigeria also. He is the former director and chief executive officer of the Kenya School of Law, a former secretary and chief executive of the Constitution of Kenya Review Commission, and a former director and chief executive of the defunct Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission, now known as the titled Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. He is a former lecturer at the University of Nairobi, the United States International University, Africa, and Widener University, USA, Nairobi Summer School, a former and founding dean of the Kabarak University School of Law. He was the distinguished Mwalimu Nyerere lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam for 2014. He was the 11th Kwame Nkrumah lecturer at the University of Cape Coast in Ghana in 2016. He has the 5th Abraham Tiro Potize lecturer at the University of Limpopo in South Africa for the year 2017. He was the Nelson Mandela Centenary Memorial Lecturer at Walter Sisulu University in South Africa in 2018. He has authored several books on diverse subjects. He was the 5th Apollo Milton Obote Memorial Lecturer in Kampala, Uganda in 2017, the 2nd Ray Phiri Memorial Lecturer at the University of Mpumalanga in South Africa, and the inaugural of Samora Moses Machel Memorial in Maputo, Mozambique in 2021. Also, Ahimada Bella Memorial Lecturer in 2023. With several thousand speeches on diverse subjects delivered in and outside Kenya, Lumumba is recognized as one of the leading public speakers in Kenya and across the African diaspora, if you like the continent. Professor Lumumba is also the founder of several organizations, including the PLO Lumumba Foundation, a charitable organization that has been in operation since 1990, the Association of the Citizens Against Corruption, and the Movement for Dialogue and Nonviolence. He has also been twice recognized as one of the 100 most influential Africans. I can continue until lunchtime, but I think I stop here. And this is Professor PLO Lumumba I present it to you. Let us join our hands.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying how glad I am to be in your midst, to have a conversation around a subject that we all know is very significant at this stage in the continent of Africa. Typically, a keynote speech is one that is pro forma and invariably is written by somebody else and read by somebody else. I have no such speech. I'll have a conversation. because this is a subject that I'm familiar with. This is a subject that I'm passionate about, and is a subject which, in my view, does not receive the attention that it deserves. And I've written a complete paper, which I hope will be circulated to you, that teases out what I consider to be the key issues that deserve attention at this time when we are having a conversation not only about the Nile Valley, but we are having a conversation about river basins. We are having conversation around water generally. I'm a student of the law of the sea, and my PhD thesis is actually on the exclusive economic zone, the use delimitation of the exclusive economic zone. And it is not lost on me that the use of water and water resources is now beginning to receive the attention that it deserves, particularly in the continent of Africa. For a long time, the continent has focused on natural resources, on what may be described as the terra firma, so that we talk about cobalt, we talk about gold, we talk about diamond, but we never pay sufficient attention to the water resources. In the year 2002, Kofi Annan made a statement that was then believed to be remote. And he said that by the year 2025, which is 2 years away from today, Africa will begin to have problems with water, just potable water. But if you read the speech of Kofi Annan in its full flavor, he was also talking about the use of water resources, both navigational uses and non-navigational uses. Africa today is a continent that ironically and paradoxically is beginning to talk about the reduction in the provision of potable water. And you go to many African cities, whether it's in Nairobi, Kenya, Kampala, Uganda, Lagos in Nigeria, or indeed Cape Town in South Africa, the problem of water is an issue. But the irony is this, that if you look at the river basins in the continent of Africa, if one may, they are legion. Go down south and you can count. If you are not talking about the Okavango, you are talking about the Orange. If you are not talking about the Orange, you are talking about the Zambezi. If you are not talking about the Zambezi, you are talking about Nkomati. And if you go to Western Africa, you are talking about the Niger, you are talking about the Mano River, you are talking about the Chad Basin. You come to a part of the world, you are talking about in West Africa, you are talking about the Volta. You come and talk about the Nile. You talk about all these, the Great Lakes region, so that if you look at the water available in the continent of Africa, of course, we are not the best watered continent on earth, but the reality is that we have resources which are underutilized. And one can never have a conversation of this nature without recognizing that the problems that we are grappling with now in the continent of Africa are a direct result of the process of colonization. If you look at the continent of Africa, and this is history with which you are familiar, if you look at the treaties that were entered into in the early 20th century, they were never designed to help the post-colonial state. If you take the Nile River, for example, which is the longest river on earth, I'm told sometimes the people in Amazon and Mississippi want to argue against it, but they never succeed because it is the longest. You will discover that the early treaties or the discussion that took place in 1920 were actually designed to assist the commercial enterprise of the British at that time. And the post-colonial state as we know it today did not exist. And when one examines the jurisprudence of the day, what we now call international jurisprudence, many African countries as we know them did not exist at that time and did not therefore participate in articulating the jurisprudence at that time. When we talk about international policy articulation, African countries did not participate as intimately as they should have. And this is true of most of the river basins. And I want to talk about the Nile first. Many of you here will be familiar with the Anglo-Egyptian agreements. And the most that we know are the agreements and exchanges of letters that started taking place in the 1990. And in 1920, and during that period, most of us know that the sea and waterways were, in a manner of speaking, the lifeblood of commerce. Therefore, the navigability of rivers was at the very heart of the use of these basins. So that when the world was thinking about how to transport goods in order to give meaning to commerce, you are looking at navigability at that time. It is in this context that we must see the Suez Canal, for example. It is in this context that we must see the Panama Canal. And when we talk about all these, we must ask ourselves, who were the players at that time in the continent of Africa? The Nile River Basin was important because the Nile was largely, in quite a number of areas, navigable. We know that there are certain aspects of it that were not navigable, but the navigability and the use of the waters for purposes of irrigation, particularly in Egypt, must be tied to commerce at that time. The British textile industry, which was the driving force of the industrialization of Britain from Manchester and different parts of the United Kingdom, required cotton. And cotton was being grown in Egypt at that time. And the British colonized Egypt. They were present in Sudan. They were present in Uganda. They were present in Kenya. They had a protectorate after the Germans left in Tanzania, in Tanganyika at that time. And therefore, when they were entering into these agreements and looking at the riparian states at that time, they were not bothered about the upstream countries. Many of us know that Ethiopia controls anything between 70 and 80% of the waters of the Nile, if you go to the Blue Nile. But if you look at the conversation at that time, Ethiopia is not under consideration. You look at the Lake Victoria, whose source was being sought by everybody, including the person for whom this particular premises speak, Munyonyo, is named. They were looking for the source of the Nile in order to determine what was the artery, if you may, of the Nile basin. And therefore, the United Kingdom looked at the Nile basin as something to be exploited. They did not care about Ethiopia. They did not care about Tanzania. They did not care about Uganda. They did not care about Tanzania. They did not care about Burundi. They did not care about Rwanda. They did not care about the Democratic Republic of Congo. They only cared about themselves. And this selfishness was transmitted by treaty to the Egyptians. We don't say it as loudly as we should. I've written an article about it when I'm talking about the interpretation of the Nile Treaty of 1929 and the succeeding treaty or agreement between Sudan and Egypt in 1959. So you who are students and initiates of the Nile River Basin will then know that the Treaty of 1929 was meant to protect British interests in a manner that was acceptable to the Egyptians. And when we as students of river basins now want to interpret that treaty, we are told that we must do so in a manner that is consistent with the laws with international law. We are told that there is a doctrine of pacta sunt servanda, that we must interpret laws in a manner that is faithful and that therefore that should govern. And when we apply the different tests of interpretation, whether it's the subjective test, the objective test, or the theological test, we should respect the Treaty of 1929. And that is the kind of argument that you see dominating discourse in geopolitical discourse and hydropolitical discourse. It is never lost on me that in 1979, when Anwar al-Sadat was signing the Camp David Accord in 1979, this is what he said, that we'll never go to war with anybody. And if we are going to war, it's going to be on the question of water and the question of the use of the Nile water. That is 1979. And not in so many words. In this month, on 19th of May, in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Egypt, when the Arab League was meeting, that is only a few days ago, I heard similar language. Poison coated with nectar. And that is what we are here to wrap our minds around. So the question that we must ask during this conversation, when we are talking about the Nile Basin, some of you are working, the good doctor, and some of you on a daily basis are talking about the Nile Basin. Do those treaties make sense today? In the post-colonial African state, when they were entered into, the African states as we know them did not exist. When we regained political independence, did we inherit those treaties? Did we accede to them? Should we be bound by them? Knowing as we do in the case of the Nile waters that Egypt even wants to tell other states upstream, before you irrigate, talk to us, you in Uganda. Before you build Bujagali, talk to us. Before you expand Owen, talk to us. Before you construct the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, talk to us. If you want to build a dam in Sudan, talk to us. And it is only when we agree that we'll allow you to do a little something. This is the kind of discourse in which we find ourselves. Yet we know that the principle of res communis, which talks about the use of common resources, not only requires of us, but enjoins us to ensure that common resources are used in a manner that benefits all. So that one is saying that democracy and diplomacy are the mother's milk of the conversation around the use of riparian resources. That is the Nile Basin. We'll be familiar with the framework of the year 1999, which you are familiar with. You'll be familiar with the initiatives in 2010 that involved Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and I think Burundi again joined in the year 2011. But are the Egyptians who opposed it? The Egyptians opposed it, as did the Sudanese. At that time, South Sudan had not been born and therefore was a part of Sudan. These are the things that I'm putting on the table for you that you may wrap your minds around them as you talk about the river basin. But we are only talking about the Nile, and I'll come back to the Nile a little later. If we go down to West Africa and we go around the Chad basin, in the last 20 years, I think Lake Chad has shrunk by more than 30%, if not more, with the consequence that the fisher population in that area are completely devastated. When you see what is happening there, the loss of the discharge of the aquifers under that particular area have suffered in a tremendous way. How are we using the Niger? How have the waters of the Niger been affected by the very reckless extraction of oil in that area? If you go to the Bakassi Peninsula, and if you go out there, you go into the Mano River, Sierra Leone, Liberia, and those countries in that particular area. You go to the Senegambia area. How are we using those waters for the economic benefit of the continent of Africa? We are talking about the unraveling of the Sahara Desert, and we are saying we should arrest the desert. Are we using those resources for purpose of ensuring that we address that particular issue, particularly in these days of climate change? When we go to the Congo River Basin, and you know the Congo River is amazing. The Congo River may not be as navigable as it should be. I remember when we were young, when they were teaching us geography, they used to tell us about there was a song about which rivers are navigable. And we used to sing that River Congo is not navigable. We know that across the Congo it is navigable. But the navigability of the River Congo, which is the conduit of transport between Kinshasa and Brazzaville, is a fountain of economic activity. But that is not what we are talking about. We are talking about the opportunities that it presents for purposes of ensuring that there is economic activity. If you are to dam the Congo River all the way and do it properly across to the Atlantic, you can imagine what it would do. In the manner, for example, that the Germans have dealt with the Rhine River. If we could do that with the Congo River, you can imagine what would happen in that basin that we are talking about. And if you go beyond, and when I talk about the Congo River, I'm also talking about the possibilities such as hydroelectric power. It is estimated that the Grand Inga Dam, if Inga Dam were to be constructed, Inga Dam would contribute to our grids anything between 100 and 150 megawatts. That is more than the installed capacity of hydroelectric in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa. And you imagine what that would do to industries. Because if you look at Africa today in terms of power generation, and you cannot begin to talk industrialization without power. Look at the installed capacity of power across the continent of Africa, and you start. Nigeria, 5,000 megawatts, that is generation. Distribution could be anything between 3,000 and 3,500. Ghana, 2,500. Liberia, 500. Sierra Leone, 500. Guinea-Bissau, about 400. Benin, 550. And if you go to Mali, it's anything between 300 and 600. You go to La Côte d'Ivoire, slightly over 2,500. The Gambia, less than 1,000. Senegal, less than 3,000. That is the power we are talking about. That is not power that you can use to industrialize. I keep on saying, of course, this is hyperbolic and exaggerating, that perhaps the power they use at the Schiphol airport is more than the entire amount of power generated in Guinea-Bissau. And I'm saying this in seriousness and in jest, because you cannot talk about industrialization without power. And I'm saying that these river basins lend themselves to modular power generation in terms of hydro capacity. And if you leave the western coast of Africa and you go down, you come to the eastern part of Africa and look at the little river that we have. In Kenya, only look at the Tana. And you go to Tanzania, look at the Rufiji and those others. And I'm happy that the Tanzanians are now beginning to use the Mwalimu Nyerere, Kambarage Nyerere hydroelectric power, which is being done by the Egyptians and is going to generate anything between 2,000 and 3,000. You are beginning to talk industrialization. You go to Rufiji, you are beginning to see what is happening in that area. You go to Ghana, you talk Volta, you are beginning to see. You go down in Zambia, you are talking about Kariba, you are talking Zambezi. And during the last drought, you saw what happened when the Kariba was drying and the power outage. Those of you who come from South Africa will be familiar with what is happening right now in terms of power provision. You have power outage sometimes almost 8 hours a day when you are on level 6. Those of you who come from Ghana will be familiar with the vocabulary that the Ghanaians gave to the world called Dumso, Dumso. Of course, they have now solved it. And one is saying that all these river resources are there and they can be exploited. The question that is then on the table, when I stop talking about the rivers, look at the Great Lakes. And ladies and gentlemen, particularly you and me of African extraction, we should be very annoyed with ourselves. Why? Look at the Great Lakes. They are only great in name. But they are not great for what they give us in terms of the use and resources. These are freshwater lakes. We now know that you can generate power through waves. What are we doing with them? What are we doing with Lake Victoria, which is now heavily polluted? What are we doing with Lake Albert? And I hope the Ugandans, when they start extracting oil, will not pollute Lake. I hate calling it Albert. You must get a proper name, Ugandans. Lake, what we now call Albert and Edward. By next year, you must change the names of those lakes. What can be done in terms of ensuring that those resources are used? You go down to what we now call the Victoria Falls, is Mosio Tunya Falls, and see what can be used to generate those things at the Mosio Tunya. And I'm saying that when we talk about the economic use and value of all these, and those of you and many of you here come from River Basin, look at the Orange now. What cannot be done in the Orange? I know the South Africans and the people from Lesotho, you are now happy. Water is still coming from Lesotho, from the islands, and going to South Africa. But in 20 years, will that water be there? If we don't manage water, will it be there? This Lake Victoria, it's what, when I grew up along the shores of Lake Victoria, we could drink directly from the lake. Today, unless you are suicidal, you will not take water from the lake. And in the rooms where you are given bottled waters, perhaps Dasani, made by Coca-Cola in Atlanta, Georgia. I think you must have felt ashamed. This is what we are talking about in terms of the economic impact and the possibilities that are there when we talk about river basins. My fear is this, that in the continent of Africa, we are incapable of understanding and appreciating the possible economic impact. I hear estimates that are being given about what would happen if we exploited our river basins and our water resources properly, and they are conservatively talking about 200 billion. Wrong. It is in the trillions. It is in the trillions. Right now, just look at the Nile. Look at what is being done at the Grand Renaissance Dam. Look at the power that is going to be generated there. 10,000 megawatts at the very least. I'm talking about hydroelectric power. Look at the industries that it can spur. Leather, manufacturing, food, irrigation in agriculture. What can it not do? We are now in the era of the 4th industrial revolution and the 5th industrial revolution. You'll need power. If you don't have power, then is a pipe dream. Power, energy is the key thing. And water is going to be the thing that is going to give us sustainable energy. And I'm saying that the Nile Valley can achieve it. But what must we do in order to ensure that we have good diplomacy? Because what we now have is what I call gunboat diplomacy. The Ethiopians are now not talking with the Egyptians because the dam is almost 90% complete. The Ethiopians say we are going to start filling the dam. The Egyptians say, you fill it, we'll see. And on 19th, the Egyptians now stopped being African, they became Arabs. They attended a meeting of the Arab League, and the Arab League has now said that they will not allow the dam to be filled as they watch. What are we being told? That if push comes to shove, we will not hesitate to use force. That is what we are being told. And don't imagine that it cannot happen. Don't imagine that it cannot happen. It can happen. Can we stop it? Yes, we can. Under the aegis of the African Union and under the aegis of the Nile Valley Basin, there is a need for urgent and important diplomacy that allows the members of the Nile Basin to ask ourselves, this is a shared resource, this Nile. It is good for all of us. You Ethiopians generate power, but be mindful of Sudan. Be mindful of Egypt. Be mindful of South Sudan. Be mindful of Lake Turkana, because the damming of the Grand Renaissance Dam is also affecting Lake Turkana in Kenya, which is becoming more and more saline because the aquifers are not now, they are not being charged. So there is a need for a conversation between Kenya and Ethiopia, as indeed with all else. But do I see such conversations taking place in a proper manner? I don't. You will correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't. What I see is we move from treaty to protocol to declaration, from workshop to symposia to colloquia without any positive movement. The time is now to put a stop to this declaration, to put a stop to workshops, to put a stop to symposia, to put a stop to colloquia, and to enter into constructive engagement which is time-bound. We cannot afford the luxury of generating heat without producing light. This is what we must do in the Nile Valley. And that conversation is also necessary around all the other river basins. There must be an understanding that transboundary resources, when in 1963, 32 heads of states gathered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, as they are beginning to do today, 60 years ago. Then they met on 24th. Then they met on the 25th. One of the things that was discussed there was whether we should redraw inherited colonial boundaries. And there were two arguments, perhaps three, perhaps four, because I can begin to hear Emperor Haile Selassie speaking about it, was the host. That we should, even on the basis of these inherited boundaries, create an environment where we will use our common and shared resources for the benefit of the entire Africa. I can hear Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere saying the same thing. I can hear the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah saying, if we begin to redraw boundaries, where will we stop? And I can hear Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, because the Aswan High Dam had then been built, saying we should not redraw the inherited colonial boundaries, but we should not use them to stop us from enjoying shared resources. That is how the doctrine of the inviolability of inherited boundaries was initiated in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1963 and adopted at the meeting in Cairo in 1964. Today, we are fighting about boundaries, about hills and molehills, and killing each other, about shared resources. We must stop. We must only see those boundaries as useful for purposes of administration. Easier said than done, but it can't be done. And those of you who are in the Nile Basin, this is the kind of diplomacy that I want to see you articulating and escalating to the head of states and heads of government in our region. There is no shortage of writing that has been undertaken in this particular area. There is no shortage of expertise, and some of you are dyed-in-the-wool experts in this arena. That is the Nile Valley. Let us go to the Congo Basin. If you look at the Congo Basin, you look at the Democratic Republic of Congo and the other possible beneficiaries like Central African Republic, the Congo Brazzaville, you go even down to Zambia. Look at what the Congo cannot do, even to Angola. Because these are interconnected. You go to Okavango down there. You go to Kariba. You go down there to Zambezi. What cannot be done in terms of creating waterways? Those of you, I see my friends from the other part of the world, hopefully from Europe and the United States of America. If they are from Europe, they'll be familiar with the Rhine Valley. Look at what the Rhine Valley has done in terms of communication and in terms of watering those areas. Even if you go to the United Kingdom, which doesn't have very little, although they call themselves great, they don't have very much. But look at their little river called the River Thames. Do you know that that River Thames was at one time like a sewage? Then they cleaned it up. We can do that to our less polluted rivers. And they can be the fountain of economic activity. They can be the fountain of agriculture so that we stop depending on rain-fed agriculture. But the constant theme is this: shared resources. I remember that great man, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, otherwise known as the Mahatma, saying, there is enough for everybody's needs, but there is not enough for anybody's greed. And in many ways, the waters that we are talking about can be shared. But we are greedy and arrogant and egotistical. And because of that, we don't share. If you go to what is now dominating African jurisprudential discourse called Ubuntu, I am because we are. Suppose we were to say that what is going to govern the use of river basin resources in Africa is Ubuntu. Would any country not enjoy those resources? Wouldn't Uganda agree with Egypt that during any 1 year we are going to use this volume of water for purposes of irrigation? Would the Ethiopians not agree that we wanted to fill the dam in 4 years? We know it will harm you, Sudan and South Sudan and Egypt. We are therefore going to fill it over a period of 8 years. Wouldn't that happen? And if we did, wouldn't we be all richer in the context of Africa Agenda 2063? Wouldn't we be all richer in the context of Africa Continental Free Trade Area so that the cotton and soya beans that is grown in Egypt will now move down through tariff and non-tariff barriers? Wouldn't the matoke grown here in Uganda not find its way to Tanzania? Would the onions grown in Tanzania not find their way to Democratic Republic of Congo? In the Western African, wouldn't the cocoa being grown in Togo and La Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana not find themselves in Liberia and Senegal? In Nigeria, if we use the resources properly, wouldn't the cows that are now grazing in the streets of Abuja not find themselves up in the north with water having been dammed as Muammar al-Gaddafi tried to do? And down south, wouldn't we discover that the Zambezi can be done and the Okavango and the Orange Free can be done so that there is no shortage of water in Cape Town? Can it not be done? And these are practical things. We are not engaged here in what one calls rocket science, but even rocket science is no longer an arcane science. It is here with us. And we are saying that the task, therefore, is ours. You know, when I talk to you here, it's like preaching to the choir. You listen to this sermon so often, but yet it must be repeated to you. Because what is clear must be made even clearer. And that is what we are doing. What one therefore is saying, go to your respective areas and ask ourselves, why are we engaged in this treadmill kind of activity where there is motion without movement? And we are saying that it must be done. And it can be done. And I am also suggesting to us that within the continent of Africa, we must now begin to do what is happening. But Europe has been very good at this because they started using their waterways a long time ago. Therefore, the issue of damming and canalization of rivers and its use for diverse areas is something that is well developed. Africa, in many ways, is still virgin in this regard. What do I see when I look at the crystal ball? So that we may engage in a conversation rather than a monologue. When I look at the crystal ball, what do I see? I see economic opportunities. I see economic opportunities in agriculture through irrigation, through targeted irrigation, not the kind of irrigation that there is wastage of water. See what the Israelis are doing through hydroponic agriculture and targeted irrigation, where a plant only receives what it needs. So the fears of Egypt are misplaced. We'll use artificial intelligence so the plant tells us, I need only 2 liters, and it receives only 2 liters. You don't spend 10 liters and while it needs 10. I see opportunities in agriculture. And what is good when our agriculture improves? It improves our health. The health burden reduces. We then become more reliant on ourselves and we don't look to Ukraine and Russia. I see opportunities in navigation. In terms of movement, the navigable waters can be used for purposes of navigation. I see opportunities in non-navigational uses of these rivers. Generation of power through hydroelectric power and through waves. I see opportunities in fishing, which is agriculture. I see opportunities in aquaculture. I see opportunities in terms of provision of potable water. One of the things that we must try to do and do very seriously is to try and liberate ourselves from water domination. If you do not know it, we are now beginning to be water dominated. The greatest suppliers of bottled water in Africa today are Nestle of Switzerland and Coca-Cola of Atlanta, Georgia. If you did not know now. So that you and me who are in the middle class, in our refrigerators, there is water which we do not own. You are drinking water from Atlanta, Georgia. We can use our water to do that. I see all those opportunities. And how do I see those opportunities helping the continent of Africa? I see those opportunities helping the continent of Africa if we engage in transboundary conversations. Africa now has many conflicts which stand in the path of the use of our water resources. As I speak to you now, the Nile Valley is in danger because there is conflict in Sudan, which if left unchecked could degenerate into a civil war. Will it not impact the use of the Nile? If there is a rogue regime in Sudan, will you be able to control whether they are polluting the river or not? As I speak to you now, how many dead bodies are being thrown into the river Nile? As I speak to you now. As I speak to you now, courtesy of the activities of Boko Haram, how many dead bodies are being thrown into the Niger and the Chad River? And it's getting into our food chain. Conflicts must be resolved. Therefore, as I conclude, I am saying that all these resources that are given to us, courtesy of nature and God, the rivers and the water resources in the continent of Africa, in my view, if we utilize them properly, will be the lifeblood and the engine at once of Africa's economic and therefore industrial growth. We are on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution and the fifth industrial revolution, which talks about artificial intelligence and quantum computing, which can be used to help us manage water resources even better. We are talking about Africa Agenda 2063. We are talking about Sustainable Development Goals. We are talking about Africa Continental Free Trade Area. All these things cannot survive without water, ladies and gentlemen. Water is the lifeblood of human development. And I remember when God was creating the world, I was not there, but I read. One of his divine instructions was, go ye and subdue the world. Our duty is to subdue our river resources so that they are able to help us. It is still true that those who seek never fail to find. Let us seek through our rivers, riverbeds, our sources, our oceans, and this continent may sooner rather than later realize what she deserves: socio-economic development, political stability, and industrialization. God bless you.
Chers collègues, c'est le moment d'échange. Le professeur est revenu plus d'une fois. Ce discours, c'est pour que nous puissions échanger. Il a insisté pour dire que c'est la conversation. Nous sommes réunis ici pour réfléchir comment nous devons aller avec nos organisations, amener le développement socio-économique, trouver des voies et moyens qui doivent nous les conduire. Et le professeur Lumumba a peint les tableaux. Je pense que c'est le moment des questions maintenant pour approfondir des aspects qu'il a relevés. Et les questions seront posées par groupe. Je sais que nous aurons beaucoup de questions, je le pense. Donc nous irons par groupe pour que nous puissions échanger davantage. Le moment des questions. Merci. qui commence. Nous avons suivi religieusement. Et le prof lui-même m'a dit qu'il était en train de donner une forme de prédication. Mais on peut toujours demander ce qui peut encore nous conduire en profondeur sur cette réflexion très très importante. Question. Oui, au fond là-bas, vous pouvez vous présenter et vous poser votre question.
Yeah, good morning. I'm very honored to meet in person PLO. I have been watching a lot of his videos and speeches. Sometimes as a white man, you're getting a little cold shiver when you listen to him. And that is, you have to take it because that's history. And I thank him for these very Pan-African reflections. As an East African, I would come to the question. First, I present myself. I'm from GIZ. I'm working at the EAC Secretariat in the Directorate of Productive Services, which is dealing with water resources and natural resources management. And we are supporting also the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, which according to me is one of the most advanced river basin organizations in the region. And my question is more to him as a political analyst. We have the problem we are developing, we are supporting probably as Europeans or German corporation, the EAC. The EAC as a regional community, probably in future to be a commission. The LVBC, one of its specialized organs. But we have a major problem. The major problem that I'm seeing is that these organizations are heavily under-resourced. The EAC, I think in 2022 had a budget of 31 million USD. That is, I don't know if it even pays 1 kilometer of the Nairobi Expressway. Is it not? This one is not working at all. Let me continue with that one, if you allow. So we have this problem. I call it actually the EAC and the partner states are behaving like a father in an African family. Yeah, he has put 7 children in the system. He wants them to grow, but he doesn't want to pay the school fees. Yeah, why? Can you explain that? At which stage are we in the development of that regional economic commission, which politically all the partner states want to promote, but they are not putting the necessary resources. The result of that is, at the end, they are maintaining the dependency of external funders, donors, development agencies, which at the end distort these organizations, because all these organizations are running, let's say, after donor money and do not develop their core functions. How can we get out of that if not the partner states are putting increasingly the resources necessary? Yeah? And for the EAC, I would say the next step, you have to be a commission. Why should you be a commission in water management? Because as a commission you can sue Kenya, Uganda, etc. for polluting the Lake Victoria. Yeah? So how are we getting there? And can you explain to me why these partner states are putting so little resources into their baby, which according to Pan-Africanist thinking is you are developing step by step, you create the SADC, the CEDEAO, ECOWAS, EAC, and then you can go to the next level. Thank you very much.
It's working?
Madam, we have the floor for the question, yes.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Tracy Mulifi. I'm from Botswana.
Micro.
Hello? 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 Yeah, we can hear you. Now it's better. Sorry about that. My name is Tracy Mulifi. I'm from Botswana, the Okavango River Basin. First, really like to appreciate and thank the professor for the commentary that he made. It's always a pleasure and enlightening to listen to you. There's something I picked from your talk about it being time to get into constructive conversation that is time-bound. And I was thinking, how do we get that, Prof? We, as you said earlier, we meet in workshops, in meetings, we say almost the same things, but there isn't any change. And I was wondering, how do we really get to change? How do we really get to influence, some of the decisions that are being made regarding management and utilization of the shared resources? How do we get to a point where we don't get bottled water? I actually looked at this and I felt ashamed. It says Coca-Cola, bottled by Coca-Cola here. So how do we get that, Prof? How do we change the way we articulate and influence the decisions that are being made? River basin organizations are being established, particularly the ones in Southern Africa, to support and provide advice and information that can lead to decisions that are factual. But somehow it's like it's not happening. What do we need to do, Prof?
Thank you, Madam. Yes, Pap. Yeah, I think we'll got three questions and Professor will give answer.
Can I have the mic, please?
Do you hear me? This time it works. Thank you. I'm going to speak in French, so I invite you, Prof, to... Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Moi, quand je vous ai écouté parler, j'ai senti chez vous un mouvement, un acteur du panafricanisme moderne. Vous êtes quelqu'un qui influenciait la pensée africaine, non pas que sur le plan de l'eau, mais de manière globale sur le plan économique, politique, social et même sociologique. Ma question est de savoir un peu si nous regardons les organismes de bassin africains dans le cadre de la coopération qu'ils mettent en place. J'ai l'impression que nous n'avons pas pu encore transformer nos organismes de bassin qui existent depuis des millénaires. C'est un espace de civilisation. Vous parliez tout à l'heure de Ubuntu, qui est un espace de partage et de solidarité. Donc nous avons déjà à l'origine compris que nous devons partager cette ressource parce que si nous ne la partageons pas, nous disparaissons. Et aujourd'hui, il y a 400 millions d'Africains qui n'ont pas accès à l'eau potable. Et dans 2050, il y aura 2 milliards d'Africains, une explosion démographique, 400 millions d'Africains auront moins de 17 ans, et on n'a pas encore anticipé des questions beaucoup plus simples. C'est que comment on va boire et on va se laver, et avant même de parler de comment on va aller industrialiser nos pays. Et quand je pense à ça, je suis angoissé. Je suis un jeune qui est né dans ce continent, qui voyage partout en Afrique. Je ne suis plus jeune, mais j'ai été jeune. Ce que je remarque, c'est que mon père, mon grand-père, mon arrière-grand-père vivaient dans les mêmes conditions. Je veux dire que nous n'avons pas encore acquis la technologie de transformation de notre civilisation. Nous vivons avec la même idée que ce qu'on a fait hier a un sens pour l'avenir. C'est la même chose. Nous ne changeons pas. Et ça, je pense que ça interpelle le cadre de coopération des espaces transfrontaliers. Parce que l'eau transforme la civilisation. Et j'ai l'impression que nous n'avons pas encore acquis cet outil de transformation de la civilisation. Donc, je vous interpelle sur cette question-là. Je sais que vous n'avez pas la solution, je le sais. Mais l'idée, c'est simplement comment on peut engager un débat. Que l'espace de transformation soit les bassins africains. Que ça soit... Regardez, juste, et j'en aurais terminé avec ça. Il y a le projet INGA 3. L'énergie d'interconnexion continentale. Ça ne bénéficie pas au Congo. C'est juste hallucinant, je n'ai jamais vu ça. Moi, je suis allé à Paris, participer à une réunion organisée par les Chinois, qui venaient nous expliquer comment ils vont transporter, fabriquer l'énergie à partir du fleuve Congo, et le faire passer par je ne sais quel pays en Europe, et que ça vienne en Asie. C'est quand même quelque chose de dingue. Et nous n'arrivons toujours pas, nous, à bénéficier de ça. Dans ces espaces africains, il n'y a pas d'électricité. Et c'est là-bas où on fabrique l'électricité. Donc voilà, j'avais envie de partager avec vous un peu cette réflexion-là. Et je pense qu'en français, c'est mieux, pour moi.
Yeah, thank you, Professor.
Once again, these are just my ideas, which I believe you who are daily practitioners, you think about these things on a daily basis. So my presentation and my response is informed by that reality. You know, about a month ago, I took time and I was watching a television live transmission being subtitled through the Chinese media called the CGTN. 6,000 Chinese leaders were meeting in Beijing. And they were discussing the future of China 100 years from thence. It means that none of them would be alive. But they are thinking about 100 years. Then they break it down into 5, into 10, as each generation goes through it. Today, there is not a single African country, and those of you who travel, and I travel across this continent, you'll always meet at least 3 young Chinese between the ages of 20 and 30, sometimes going to Kaduna in Nigeria, Swakopmund in Namibia, Nampula in Mozambique. I've met them. And I get into a conversation with them. One I met in Nairobi, Kenya, he told me he had been in the Delta region in Nigeria for 3 years. He's 27, and he'd been in Kenya for 4 years. I asked, but when did you come? How old were you? Said I was I was 21. Now, when that gentleman is 50, he knows Africa more than all of us combined. That's true. Thinking, strategic thinking. And indeed, even if you look at the colonial project, it was strategic thinking. These people you hear like Speak or Stanley, they were in their 20s. But your typical African, if he's in Kampala here and you tell him to go to Hoima, he says that is hardship area. Hoima here. Or Gulu, he thinks it's hardship area. And somebody has come all the way from Germany, from the comfort of Cologne, and is in Marsabit. We must change. I sat down with a friend of mine who used to be the former president of Tanzania, John Joseph Pombe Magufuli, and he told me he attended 2 meetings. International, then he said he stopped attending those meetings. Because they keep on saying the same thing. Number one, your ministers come to you with speeches that they've already written. You meet the speech, and I'm using the word meet deliberately. You meet the speech on the podium, written in big print, then you read it, and then they take it away. Then you wait for another meeting. That is not transformation. Has Africa ever gone into a space of transformation? Are African countries doing that? Yes, there are countries that are doing that. If you look at the activities of the Ugandan president in the first 10 years, hear me clearly, transformation, moving the country in the right direction. Look at Mugabe, first 10 years in Zimbabwe, direction. Look at Rwanda. Look at Botswana, Serese Khama. Look at Tanzania. Look at Abdel Nasser, the first few years. This is when the big dams were being done. Look at Kaunda when Kariba was being done. Look at Samora Machel when he was talking about Nkomad. Look at Nkrumah with the Volta. I'm giving you these examples that you may not know. You may know that there are indeed men and women who think right. You all think right. Your problem is that you are operating in environments where there is toxic politics, where the politician is not thinking like the Chinese intergenerationally. They are thinking about the next elections. When you are always thinking about the next elections, you cannot transform anything. The only thing you can transform is your stomach. That is the problem of Africa. Right now, here in Uganda, and I say these things boldly because we must say things boldly. Ugandans are talking about elections in 2026. Kenyans are talking about elections in 2027. We just held elections 9 months ago. We are already making formation for 2027. When do we think about the Nile Valley or the Lake Basin Development Authority? How can we, my good friend from, how can we possibly think? We are thinking about raising money for the next election. We are not thinking about changing villages. My home, my rural home is across the lake from Lake Victoria. As I speak to you now, there is not a single water project running in my village of 60,000 people. GIZ and all these other Western bodies which intend to help us are there. But you're also getting fatigued. And I hope and pray you get fatigued. Perhaps that is what will open our eyes. And I'll give you an example when I talk about, I'm mixing the transformation and the question of under-resource. I'll give you a good example which has nothing to do with this. In the year 2001, African governments met in Abuja in Nigeria and said that they were going to dedicate 15% of their national budget to health. And you know, when you talk health, you are talking water. You are talking about potable water. You are talking about the water that is being consumed in order to eliminate bilharzia, in order to eliminate all these things. Not a single African country did 15%. Tanzania, Rwanda, and Mauritius went up to 10%. During that period, if you look at the money that was taken outside of the continent of Africa to Panama and Guernsey and Switzerland, it could finance all those things. Our priorities are wrong in Africa. They are wrong, and therefore we don't look at the thing that we ought to. Look at the Lake Victoria Basin. I remember I used to be an active member of a group of people called the Friends of Lake Victoria, or Sienala, whom you must know. It died. Perhaps it is in comatose, waiting to be resuscitated. But why did it die, or why is it in comatose? Because they were dependent on donor funding. So the donor will fund you year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, buy you V8 and other things. And then at one time somebody said around Lake Victoria there were more V8s than there were mosquitoes. That of course is hyperbolic. But what he was saying, that there were so many of these NGO V8s running around Lake Victoria, but nothing was being done. And what happens with many African governments, as long as they factor donor funding into their national budget, the money does not go to something else. It goes to people's pockets. That is the reality. And Lake Victoria Basin that you've talked about is, I mean, in terms of the economic opportunities that it has, you may not know, but in my rural home, if you go to Kisumu, we are importing fish from China. Fish, tilapia, from China. Can you believe it? The Chinese are growing things that look like fish. We don't know whether they are fish. They have the likeness of fish. And we are eating them gleefully. Yet this lake can produce fish to feed the entire sub-Saharan Africa, Lake Victoria Basin alone. And those of you who are there, because it's a part of the Nile Basin system, those of you who are there know what aquaculture can do. Right now, there are cages all over. The effect of the cages in terms of pollution, I do not know. But do you know where we are importing fish feed? From Brazil. How should we be importing fish feed from Brazil? What is fish feed? Soya. Soya, which we can grow around the Yala Basin. So when you look at this thing, sometimes when I look at our, and don't be afraid, gentlemen, because I know politicians that are at the head of it, but you cannot talk about sin without mentioning Satan. So the problem of Africa is poor quality political leadership. And until the day that we solve that, we are going nowhere. Let you not be cheated. Writing a book in 1983, guys, Nigeria's Chinua Achebe, in the book The Trouble with Nigeria, says the problem of Nigeria, and I dare say by extension the problem of Africa, is simply and squarely a problem of political leadership, nothing else. Because where there is political leadership, you see development. Look at Mauritius. What does Mauritius have? Nothing. They closed 4 of their sugar factories. Today, Mauritius has a GDP per capita that is larger than the entire continent of Africa. Yes. Why? Leadership, prioritization, what to do. What Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore used to say, MPC, meritocracy. Have your best men and women presiding over your affairs. Pragmatism. Get what you want. If you want a rat coat, don't care whether the cat is black or white. Honesty. Have your best men and women. But what have we given premium to in Africa? Mediocrity. In fact, in Africa, mediocrity is a badge of honor. The more mediocre you are, the further you rise. And when that is what you do, then when we come to the budgeting aspects of it, resources will be misallocated. Very good friends of mine, GIZ is very present in Africa today, doing useful things. But I told just to tell you how sustainability is also very important. You can give us money year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, but year 5 you begin to wonder, these people that we are helping, they must continue to be in economic diapers. They don't grow. They are stunted in their growth and in their thinking. Then in year 6, you say, we are going back to Bonn. You who are in the development partnership arrangement must also, when you come to Africa, have an exit plan. You come in year 1 and tell the people, we are leaving in year 5. And you don't revise it. Because with the mistake you do, in year 5, the politicians come to you and say, you know, now, just continue for a little longer, particularly when the elections are near. Refuse. Because it is only that way that you'll help us. A neighbor who keeps on giving you food on a daily basis becomes your enemy. Because you lose the instinct to cook. So there must be a point in time said, I'll give you food for 10 days, but in the 11th, please, learn how to cook. We are under-resourced because of resource allocation. On the 19th of May, I was in Kigali, Rwanda, and had the opportunity after a long time of meeting the chair of the Africa Commission, Musa Faki, and I told him, how can it be that the African Union is 60 to 70% funded by Western NGOs? How is it an African Union? And he told me the same thing. My members don't contribute. They don't contribute. But see how much money they spend in political rallies. Do I blame them? Yes. Who else do I blame? The African voter. You blame the windmill and you blame the wind. So we Africans must style up. It is only then that they'll be under-resourced. Otherwise, you'll have these empty bodies in the Lake Victoria Basin which only do two things. Many of these organizations, the only thing that is happening is that salaries are being paid. Beyond salaries, there is no development. So, misallocation of resources because of poor politics. Okavango, time-bound. Once again, these things must be time-bound. Africa Water Vision 2025. You know, when we started saying that, you and me, the situation has actually become worse. So 2025 is 2 years away, and the water situation in Africa is becoming worse. He's just said it. Is there anything that we are doing about it? No. Are there targets? Look at SDG number 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Look at the African aspirations, of the 7 aspirations, what we are targeting. Our things are not time-bound. And once again, let me tell you, poor politics. Poor politics. As long as we don't fix the problem of politics, both with a capital P and with a small p, we are going nowhere. And it is you and me who are the problem. Somebody comes and the president is beginning to look at his tribesmen. Nepotism and ethnicity is the bane of Africa. Our best men and women are not serving our continent. They are serving other continents. That is our problem. So how can we have anything time-bound? No. Development in the mind of your typical African politician is meant to be a mirage. The nearer you get to it, the farther it moves. That is what justifies their claim that I must not leave office because I'm the catcher of the mirage, which he never catches. What must we do, you who are frustrated in these bodies? We must keep up at it in the hope that one day the wax in their ears will melt and the scales in their eyes will fall. Has it happened? Yes. Mauritius, I've already given you an example. Your own Botswana. Don't think that Botswana, do you know when Bechuanaland regained our political independence, what you had? Zero. Zero. Then you entered, Serese Kama entered into an arrangement with the De Beers, a bad arrangement, but it brought you something. Then the country grew, which means it can be done. Look at your Pula. Don't undersell your country. I know you are now negotiating about your gold, and I think you are going to enter into a very bad arrangement. Tell President Musisi. It cannot be 20%, it should be 60%. Yes. And then within the next 5 years, it is 80%, then you can float 20 for other investors. Let it be 80%. So Botswana is doing a good job, despite the many problems that you have. Good job. Rwanda, good job. But I keep on telling African countries, individually we are too small. No matter how we do it, individually we must do it as a group. As a group, if you are a goat, no matter how much you eat, you can only be a fat goat. You cannot be a cow. I'm saying that if we want to eat an elephant, you can't swallow an elephant. You eat it bit by bit. So Rwanda is doing a good job in that. In Tanzania, good job, time-bound. And if you listen to the good lady, Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan, when she inherited the construction of the Mwalimu Nyerere hydroelectric dam. Say, this must be done during the time period, and it's going to be finished. I think they are going to begin generating power. The gas from Mtwara, the preservation on the glaciers of Kilimanjaro. I'm giving you live examples. It can be done. So, time-bound is not easy, but we must keep on repeating it. And I think that that is the best we can do.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Yes, engineer.
Can we join our hands really to appreciate Professor Lumumba? You said that you can have motion but no movement. But I know this August Assembly here, they are eager to listen to you. It's like we can dedicate one day to engage, listen to him. He has a lot. He's a treasure. Those old days without this new kind of technology, nanotechnology and the others, you talk of Britannica, Encyclopedia. This is our Encyclopedia. So we'll find time again to have such kind of audience so that we can talk more and benefit and tap your wisdom. I know you are connected with the presidents of the countries. Yeah, you are friends of many. You talk, you engage. So from today we engage you and we take you as a member of our family of river basin organizations. Please accept that kind of invitation. You gave us food of thought, and we will continue to digest. And I think we have benefited for the short time. I call it a short time. I remember, and I quote you, that if we want to speak more than 30 years, people will start looking internets and all this. And I see them, I have seen them, because according to the program is a break, is a health break. I could just change a little bit. I think you have put us enough on our plate. So thank you very much indeed again. And for that matter, I request the chair of this session to announce that we will change a little bit of the program. Sorry for anyone who has the questions, but you can engage with the professor during the break time. But also take the contacts and emails. You can exchange ideas. You can write to him. You can write it to him for bilateral engagement and talk. I think this is where. Do we agree? Yeah. Can we join our hands? Yeah, put the signature on what I'm doing. So for that matter, Chair, I request you now to cause a health break, and then we reconvene, because today I think after lunch we will shift. We'll go to Entebbe. So let's be, I know, like Professor have helped me to summarize very well. He was preaching to the pastors and sheikh and imams, but enough to be repeated. Repetition is not a crime, so you are not going to jail. So don't worry about that. So thank you, Professor, again, for coming and joining us. And have time really to engage bilaterally with us. Yeah, because this day, I know you are traveling today back, but try to use your other time, private time, to engage whoever comes. Please help us. Thank you very much indeed. God bless you. Yeah, chair for you. You can announce.
I think we're at the end and announced by the engineer, Matemo. So we pause for the health now. Finished. Thank you. Applause again to the professor.
We want to make history together. I invite the executive secretaries, heads of institutions to come here and we have a photo before we go for break. Please.